Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today, our guest is Daniel Doiron, and we're going to talk about some interesting topics. Intro, elevator pitch for your throughput accounting, and related to mobbing, and then brown money and green money. Maybe first off, you can introduce yourself, Daniel, and tell us a little bit about your interests and where you're coming from.
Yes, well, basically, I've been in IT for the major part of my career, and along the way, I did my CPA to become an accountant. Not so much because I wanted to practice accounting, but because a lot of the applications that I was doing were dealing with accounting, and at sometimes I was just as confused as the next person. So I did my CPA. I am a CPA for all intents and purposes. And now at the end of my career, I get to use it professionally, in the sense that accounting, throughput accounting, that is something that is part of the theory of constraint from Dr. Eli Goldratt. And it is a decision-making arm of the theory of constraint. It is an accounting system as well, a financial application, and also a improvement initiative method. And what distinguishes throughput accounting from all the other improvement initiatives is that whenever you make a decision with throughput accounting, there is this phenomenon of causality. The results will be felt quite rapidly and immediately. And as opposed to the other improvement initiatives that we have, ADCAR, CMMI, and you name it, there's no cash outlay, no green money that is required right at the start, which is very interesting and also attractive because the five focusing steps of the theory of constraints: identifying the constraint, exploiting the constraint, subordinating to the constraint. They don't require any money, new money. You can basically take your existing operating expenses, which we may call brown money. And I'll give you an example. If you, Chris, and Austin are working at the constraint, and you go for a bite, both of you, from 12 to 1. Well, for an hour, every day the constraint is down and you're not making money. Easy way, no cash outlay. Say, hey, Chris, you go for a bite from 11:30 to 12:30. And Austin, you go from 12:30 to 1:30. And that way, well, you don't get to chat so much at lunchtime anymore, but the constraint keeps humming, and it doesn't require any kind of investment in terms of green money. And this is what people forget to understand, is that most of the time the CIOs will come and say, I got this $280 million budget and I don't have a dime to spare. Well, that's $280 million of brown money where you can just arrange things, find the constraint, elevate the constraint, and do all sorts of things to basically bring green money into your pocket.
All right.
So that's the 5-minute introduction.
Yeah. I think maybe we should have some terms definitions here, because I think a lot of our audience have a little less CPA training, I guess. Yeah. You want to run through green money, brown money, even dig into a theory of constraints a little bit, and then maybe we can start the discussion there.
Okay. So basically, Eli Goldratt was a great thinker. And at some point, one of his friends was struggling in the early 1980s when we had high inflation and high unemployment. And his friend was struggling to make money. And Eli told him, let me help you make more money now and in the future. And this is where the 5 focusing steps came about. Dr. Goldratt said, first, identify the constraint of your system. Where is it that the bottleneck or the constraint of your system, where is it that stuff tends to pile up and clutter your system? Once you have identified it, exploit it. Make sure that that constraint runs at 100% capacity. Okay. And then there's 5 focusing steps, but usually limiting ourselves to the first 3 focusing steps is enough. And then you have to subordinate to the constraint. You have to do everything so that the constraint doesn't starve and that you don't overproduce. And this is where the brain really gets into a funny exercise, is that you have got to understand and learn when to stop producing, so that inventory in the system doesn't increase to a level that increases WIP, and that basically decays the time that it takes to make decisions and to have a clear view as to what is happening. And oftentimes people say, that's not too hard. Well, it's something that you need to be trained. Like, for example, I'm going to give you an example. Boxers, when they box in a fight, they're meant to be aggressive to one another and really take the lights out of the other opponent. But sometimes you have to take a standing 8 count. You got to kneel down, take a standing 8 count so that you can keep yourself in the bout. But taking a standing 8 count is not in the mentality of a boxer. You see, you got to be trained to do that. It's the same thing in martial arts. Certain times when you're in a submission, in a position to be submitted and the pain is intense, all you want to do when the pain is intense is scream. You have to train, to be trained to tap and give up. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with knowledge work. When you see that the system is full, the system is beyond what it should be, you have basically got to stop producing. And this is what is not easy. And when I watched, I got to watch mob programming a bit. And what's interesting is that you got one team. So that one team is always a constraint. And that's interesting because it's a constraint when you're executing. It's a constraint when you're executing and thinking and doing system analysis. So it's really interesting to see how and when you would see an opportunity for Slack and stop working. And I was wondering, like, shall the computer be a constraint? That would be stupid, because it doesn't make sense. So it's got to be the team. And I was wondering who within the team should be kept busy at all times, depending on, I guess, the kind of topic or the kind of user stories you would be doing.
Yeah.
So basically, when you're in business requirements, business analysis, if the DBA doesn't work or is not busy, there's no point in that DBA trying to get to 4 or 5 stories upstream to try to do something, because he'll create waste. It's better that DBA just sits, go for big lunches, play squash for part of the afternoon, instead of overproducing. And when it's a sysadmin type of user story, then the business analyst can behave in the same way. And that is not easy to basically program into your head. And I was wondering, you guys, if what you do about Slack, do you see it? Do you care about it? Or you just work all the time? And when you're not busy, you're just going to go 1 or 3, 4, 5 user stories upstream?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll take a first swipe at it. But so I'll be very honest. I'm very new into the world of theory accounting and throughput accounting. Theory of constraints. Yes, and so, but I'm fascinated by it. I love a lot of tie-ins to Lean and things like that. And the more you talk and the more I've heard about it, the way it relates to me is that, I go back to earlier in my career, and an analyst, you mentioned an analyst, just sitting there producing requirements, right? Or producing design. Yes. And then you have this huge pile up of requirements and design, and they'll just keep producing them, even though there's not enough to, pass on to the next person. And so what I love about mobbing is whether that's front end, back end, database, you know, whatever it is, everyone who is needed is there. And so there's no queuing and waiting, right? And so the person who has the domain knowledge, let's say, let's just say an analyst, for example, is working directly with the people who are writing the software. And so what we do with mob programming that's different than, hey, the analyst did his thing and he doesn't want to overproduce, so he's going to go take a long break or whatever, that the analyst cross trains on the other skills. And instead of checking afterwards, for example, like he's checking as it's being created and also learning other people's skills. So it's kind of a move towards lean generalists. You still have your specialty. Like I love extreme programming. I love unit tests for factoring, but I'm stretching to learn more about cloud, or I'm stretching to learn more about the business domain I'm working in. And so basically the mob just keeps moving and producing throughput without waiting for handoffs.
Yeah, but there is a tax to that, you know, in the sense that sometimes, you know, I want to be left alone and I don't want to teach anyone new tricks. So it's a sort of indirect tax.
Right.
But I would say that the important thing is that as a nucleus, the team that's doing the work has a better chance of keeping an eye on who's straying away too far, you know, and instead of saying I want to cross train or whatever, sometimes it's just like, hey, I'm just not getting involved for the rest of this user story or whatever, and I'm taking it easy. I got personal stuff to take care of or whatever. But the important thing is that maybe 1, 2, or 3 people on any given sprint. You call those sprints, I guess.
In our context, we do pure Kanban and pull system, so no sprints.
Okay. So target scopes type of stuff.
Basically, you know, it's kind of a form of same sizing, I guess, if you will. So bring it down to. So often it's releasing every 4 hours to production, something like that. That's what we're targeting.
Okay, so that's another thing about the theory of constraint and throughput accounting is that we love to play on the time axis. We don't like to play on the scope axis, because the scope axis, things can explode in a non-linear way really quick. If you stick on the time axis, time has a very nice feature in and of itself. It has 1 degree of freedom. It can't go left, right, backward, or it goes one way. And managing on the time axis simplifies a lot of things. That's which people do sprints and time boxing stuff just don't get, and they pulling the plug anyway. So that is a very good thing, and that is a thing that is because in the theory of constraint, Dr. Goldratt said managing on the time axis is what it is all about. Okay, because all of the systems are made on that precept. And for example, if you were to have read the Lean Product Development book by Daniel Doiron, he has, I think, 175 principles. Everybody knows this book, but this book really is a throughput accounting decision-making book, because every time you take one of these principles and you apply it, the results are really quick and fast coming, and they impact the 3 variables of throughput accounting, which is cost, revenues, and investments. Investment, not so much with the 175 principles, but definitely flow time and definitely cost. So these 175 principles are throughput accounting decision-making principles as well. And I have in the book an entire chapter dealing with my new book, which is Throughput Accounting for Knowledge Work. And I deal with all of Daniel Doiron's flow principles. And I have Dr. John Ricketts, who Eli Goldratt said was the person during his lifetime, because Dr. Goldratt died quite a while ago. But he said that Dr. John Ricketts, applied the theory of constraint like no one did. And he did so at IBM, managing the fleet of consultants worldwide. And I went through all the principles with Dr. Ricketts, and we found if they matched and fit with the theory of constraint, and it does very well, except for 4 or 5 major things, it does very, very well. So Mr. Ranitson's work really stands up to the test of time.
Cool. Yeah, I had a. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think you all know Dr. John, Mr. Ranitson's work. Eh? We all.
Yeah, I've seen some of his material. It's been very impressive for me, and I think it was you, Chris, who referred him to me. So, yeah. Yeah, I had one follow-up question. So you were talking before about throughput accounting being used for improvement, and one thing that comes up that I thought you could maybe, I would be interested in your comments on. And so I'll do one analogy that's with education. So if you're educating your kid or a teacher is educating the class, they'll talk about in kind of the education world that sometimes it feels easier just to buy new curriculum. Like, hey, I want to make things better, so I'm just going to buy something, right? Like I check it out in the store, I walk out with it, I feel like improvement is happening because I purchased something.
Yeah.
And where turning around and working, with your student or your child is different. And so I wonder if that, because you said you don't need to buy anything to do improvement via throughput accounting. Is that a challenge for its adoption? I wonder, because it feels like often C-suite people want to buy something and be like, oh, we want to go agile, let me buy that, and so how can I pay X dollars to do that now, or something?
People always want new toys, eh? And basically, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, the concept of wait time and touch time, right? But basically, if you buy a new thing, a new toy or whatever, you're going to impact touch time and the way you work, okay? But by improving yourself with brown money, you're basically attacking wait time, the time that you spend not working. And wait time occupies 95% of our time. So if you buy a new toy, you're going to get an improvement on 5% of your time, which is considering the cost of thing a waste of money, because you're going to change the way you work as well, and people resist change. But if you focus on wait time, reducing work in process, finding out where your constraint is, subordinating to the constraint, you're basically shrinking the wait time, which is 95% of your total time. So the low-hanging fruit are there. The only problem is, because I lived it, is that people like to have new toys and new money. But it's a road to perdition, because the low-hanging fruit lie with common cause variation. Mr. Reinhardson said, if you want to improve and make a lot of money, you got to go at your system as it is and find common cause and fix it. Now, what agile system is built to find problems with common cause? Not a single one. Because what we did with agile is that we imported everything from lean manufacturing from Deming's. Did Deming care about common cause problems in the system? No, he only cared about special cause, because we're always doing a car. There's no problem with the system. Common cause is not an issue. It's when something unusual happens, it's a special cause. You pull the end on cord, and at work you go to fix that problem. So we imported that into agile. Not a single methodology is built to address common cause. Not a single one. Except, guess who? Dr. Goldratt, the only thing that meant something for him was common cause. That's all he cared about. And all of his knowledge was geared through finding common cause problems with leading indicator of risk materialization. And at some point, Agile has to wake up to understand where all of its theory comes from, and that it's not meant for Agile, because Agile, the problems are not with repetitious work. The problems are with the time and the variability that is accumulated with time. And the only one, and everything that Agile does is to try to kill the variability caused by the passage of time. So you sprint, you stop, and every time you stop, it causes a lot of problem. But if you have a nice system that tracks common cause, the passage of time is not so much an issue. And this is where people have to realize that it's time to throw all of the Agile books in terms of execution out the window. Well, basically, there's none in terms of execution. There's no book on execution. Daniel Doiron does a pretty good job with his book. But aside that, nobody cares too much about common cause. Finding systemic problems to fix them.
Yeah, and I think the word Agile is difficult because it's hard to know what we're talking about exactly. So maybe if we get real concrete, you could help me out. So what's an example? Let's say a company that's developing software as a product. What's like an example of like a common cause that you're trying to identify, I suppose?
Okay, well, a common cause would be a problem that is linked, that is systemic, that is linked with the system. It's things that happen now and then, but that you can't quite put your finger on, okay? Special cause is very clear. It's, that's what it is. Okay, it's not systemic. It's something that you can point your finger at. There was a power failure in the city, and there's no production today. When you're asking me about software development and common cause, is that there are very few things that can help you track common cause. Well, there are, in the sense that everything that is able to self-check the system, right, to self-correct, to self-detect, these would be attributable to common cause. But in terms of knowing if you're overproducing, if you are when it is time to start work, when it is time to stop work, and give you the signals to do that, there isn't much. And if you don't have these things, you will always tend to overproduce and to be in a local optimum world. Like the business analyst will try to do as much as they can and have as many business analysts as they can, so that they can be king of all the other functional areas. The same with the DBAs and the same with the other people. But there are good systems in terms of deployment, for example, that I can think that can deal with common cause. But when I think of Agile in general, and the way we develop software, and are we overproducing? Are we going fast enough? And what is our capacity? Okay, so there I'm going to ask you a question. Now I'm going to go back at you, Austin. What system do you have that will tell you what is your capacity? Do you know your capacity? You don't. Nobody knows what their capacity is. No one. Because we live in a world where we think that capacity is only a one-edged sword. Like, it is what we have and it is what we produce, and this is our capacity. And nobody cares about capacity in the world. No one company cares, except armies throughout the world. They have to know what they're able to do. But in terms of companies, very few treat capacity like the theory of constraint does. Like the theory of constraint says, okay, you got productive capacity. That is for the constraint to function. Then you have protective capacity to protect the constraint from starving. And then you have excess capacity on top and above, where slack lives, you know, and slack is essential for high performance company. So where would you have a system and computer engineering that will help you manage these three types of capacity, which are essential for high-performing organization? Well, there's none. Okay, sorry, but I think there's none. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Well, I guess I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. And one thing that you can help me with a little bit, and so I'm a learner in this world, right? But I see a lot of.
I'm a learner in your world too. So. Learn as we go.
In my experience, the book, The Goal, and Goldratt and Lean. Yeah. I see a lot of people in extreme programming. I see a lot of synergy, and usually I see people talking about how they are achieving common goals. But the way you're talking about it is that you're making them sound like diametrically opposed. Like here's Lean on one side and theory of constraints on the other. And I guess before I answer some of your questions, I would like you to get your take on that.
Well, I'm a positional by nature, and we always preach for our own choir, right? So being lean and being Scrum and being that, you're always going to say my stuff is better than yours. But the common goal, I agree with you. But Dr. Goldratt said that the goal, most of the time, would be to make more money. To make more money, because with money, not only can you be prosperous and everything, but you can spend more time with your family, you can contribute to society, and you can do a lot of things. So, which system would be focused on that? For example, Lean. Lean thinks that you can optimize production by leveling capacity, right? And the theory of constraints says, no, you don't optimize by leveling capacity. You optimize by lowering work and process everywhere. And I might be wrong on a few things that I say because I'm not an expert on Lean, but Lean thinks that leveling capacity is done by leveling the physical capacity everywhere, but not the theory of constraint. So these are difficult questions to answer, but at the end of the day, can you make more money? And the reason why the theory of constraint is deemed as an improvement model is that you're trying to reduce also your cash-to-cash cycle, the time that it takes between you basically start something and the time that you get your money. Mm. And people don't necessarily measure the time that it takes between those two states. So, and very few people do.
Yeah, and, maybe I can dive in a little bit. So you had the common causality thing, which I think I frequently refer to as second order effects often, right? Okay. So you might have a second order effect of a decision made somewhere that caused side effects all across the system. Those sorts of things. And then, kind of backing up to the question of, how do you protect the capacity and also guarantee slack and those sorts of things, right? And so, kind of the thing that I've experienced that's been pretty effective, because I've seen teams that have been completely over allocated, right? It's like kind of the resource utilization.
Yes. Yes.
So a mob will typically have a regular throughput. Every incremental addition to a reduction in capacity, basically if you don't write unit tests, you're going to have your capacity reduced because you're dealing with bugs in production, right? So
absolutely.
So if you can get a team down to 0 bugs in production that can produce regularly and automate all of the deployment costs, then that team can pull from a Kanban, at a consistent rate, and all features are prioritized based on cost of delay, and the and the incremental components contributing to that cost of delay are relatively same sized and deployed frequently, right? Then you know, a mob, right, as a unit of work will continue to produce and have, you know, protected slack time. And often, you know, the scenario where people step away or stay with the mob, mobs are very resilient to people taking breaks and other things along those lines. So so that's kind of how I look at it, right? So you know, if you practice Kanban, limited WIP, you know, all of these things, then you do end up with a system that can do that. And so, you know, one thing that's really dangerous to that scenario is somebody saying, oh, well, can we incrementally add more to the load? Can we utilize more? Can we utilize more? Can we utilize more? Which I think is very common across in any business context. I think, you know, so I think, you know, I was talking to a group of engineering leaders, and I think that one kind of hypothesis that was said was that you know, engineering leadership is kind of this process of constantly talking about why the process is effective that's being used, because there's so much pressure, consistent pressure, to increase utilization, you know, in an unlimited way. So yeah, so I think there's something of like pushing back on external forces, as well as practicing those lean practices. Like, that's kind of how I would answer that question.
That's very good, and I agree with you. One of the main benefits of using Kanban systems is that once you're in a Kanban system with the capped capacity, this can absorb variability and make sure that you can deliver. Okay. Outside of that system, delivery time is unpredictable.
Yes.
But once you get inside, you get some predictability. So the choice is always yours. You can wait outside the system and inside the system if you don't use Kanban, or you'll always have to wait outside of the system. There's no getting around that. But once you're inside, Kanban system have this very nice attribute, is that they absorb variability.
Mm-hmm.
And they will always do, if you have a capacity restraint system with a pull mechanism, it's a winner, okay? And that would be a nice, it's a system design.
Yeah.
But depending on how you use your Kanban system, if you use column WIP limits, you're opening the door for special cause variation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use a con WIP, you know, just an aggregate WIP limit, then you're more likely to succeed without having to deal with common cause variation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Without having to deal with special cause variation.
And I think I've seen, maybe because you've talked about, you know, going against overproduction and having WIP limits, and I've heard that often talked about in a lean context, because of the goal is to eliminate waste, right? Because if you get WIP limits, then you're going to prevent the overproduction and things like that. And I think maybe one way to think about mobbing is that we've heard recently is you have the whole system in the room, right? And so you see, to see what the effects of the effects that Chris was talking about, and maybe that's what you're getting at with the common versus special. It's much more apparent to a team
it's visible.
If it's visible, it's very visible. Yeah, and the whole system's in the room, right? Where when the system's disparate,
that's right.
When the system's disparate, it's really hard to understand the chain reactions.
Yeah. I think the whole system is in the room is the ultimate version of visualization, you know?
Right.
Because but how many people can make up a mob programming team that has one computer?
Yeah. So my, you know, so the throughput, right, is not, you know, for any software development effort, is not how quickly you can type into the keyboard, right?
No.
It's all thought work. And so
Absolutely.
we, I think we as a group were very anchored by the open space technologies conferences, where with the law of personal mobility. And so this is the idea that, when you're at a conference, at an open space conference, if you're at a talk and you're not learning or contributing, then go to a different talk. And to try and break that that notion that you have to stay at a conference talk once you attend.
Absolutely.
And so
yes.
we have a working rule within our mobs that if you're not learning and you're not contributing, go to a different mob. And so that means that the size of the mob can grow or shrink depending on the intensity of the problem. Typically, if everybody is learning and chiming in, learning or contributing, then really the mob can be any size, right? But
I get it.
the complexity of the problem is going to be, if somebody can navigate the solution, then typically it will be a smaller number of people. And I think we found that going down to 2 has some unique issues, and so 3 is kind of where we sit at for a minimum typically, and then we grow to as many people that can learn and contribute. So the largest kind of functioning mob that I've been to was an example from a conference where we had 20 people in the room, all using a quantum computer for the first time. And so it was a lot of people, it had a Python API. So a lot of people were saying, do this. I'm researching physics. I'm researching how quantum computing is working. I know the API. I'm researching that. And people are just popcorning ideas, right? So that's a large functional mob that is increasing throughput. And then on the other hand, if you have a very skilled group of people working on a series of APIs, you get the benefits of reducing silos and increasing throughput, and that can be done at around 3 people. So those are kind of typically the 2 stories that I tell around mob size.
What I find difficult is that people come in and leaving a mob. In terms of social stress for the one that are most in demand, they must say, "Come on, leave me alone." That would be my first reaction. I don't have time for this. Anyway, but
it's possible, and it is. I mean, it is something that we do retrospectives on, and there are definitely people that want to be involved in everything and like to hop around, and others that like to stay focused. And then some people with specialty skills that it really requires them to go from mob to mob. And so what I can say about that is that for the people that I think felt some stress about that, I think commonly what ends up happening is that they still feel more effective. And so Aaron Griffith's papers and I think really elaborate on that idea, but this idea that it might be more stressful, but as a whole system, the system gets a lot more work done, and therefore it's more satisfying to be a part of that system. So those are kind of vague.
It must be deeper than that. It must be extremely rewarding. I must agree. But for my liking, it's not my cup of tea. I like to have my time and my space to work, and I think that this is mortgaged, when you work in that type of environment. But I'm not saying that it cannot work and that some people just don't enjoy that.
So if you're building quality control in, and I know that we're talking about kind of Deming style lean, but in the Deming style lean, there's a lot of like the red bead experiments, and and so I think one thing that has been generally accepted by the industry from the red bead experiment is this idea that having multiple people looking at the code before it goes to production, right? And so, it's like that time alone, but then you get pull requests. But pull requests can introduce lean waste into the system. And so I think it's just a trade-off, right? And so we have a general rule that working alone is okay as long as you have a second pair of eyes on the code. So pull requests are not required in mobs, but they are required for individual work. and that's kind of how we balance that, right?
That's smart. But hey, listen, by all means, I didn't say that Deming's contribution was not essential. I'm saying that a lot of stuff of Deming's did not mind common cause. It's the system is great. No, this thinking is fantastic, but he was mainly concerned with special cause. Okay, pulling the end on is special cause. Okay, and that's all I'm saying. But this stuff is just as brilliant as Goldratt or Ono. You know, just, you know.
Hey, well, and the red bead experiment kind of talks a lot to the pressures from management and introducing quality problems and delays and queuing, right? And so you know, I think that, you know, that is sort of a second order effect analysis, but maybe never really is discussed that way. But it's really a good thing to pay attention to explicitly. And like I talk to a lot of people, you know, about what are the second order effects of this decision. And you know, I think very often the answer is like, well, I really hadn't thought about the side effect of the side effect of the side effect, going to second and third order, right?
What I wanted to call those were externalities.
Yeah.
You know, it's like an environment. We often talk about externalities. If you go with solar or wind, there are externalities that people don't consider. As well as with nuclear or whatever. And
a good example of that was when we were all mobbing in person. You know, we didn't realize that scaling up the team, like we didn't really conceptually when we were scaling up the team, we were like, oh yeah, a big open space, you know, a lot of noise happened, right? And then we also, when we went remote because of the pandemic, it was like, oh, hey, remote is actually a lot quieter, and so people can think a lot more, even though you're on a mob remotely. And so we've had, you know, like ambient noise levels has really been a big part of our mob programming journey, and so there have been all kinds of things explored because of it, and then also, you know, benefits to remote that we weren't really conscious of, right?
Well, one of the big benefits of mob programming is that people don't have don't go and bug people, you know, from outside the mob because they say, oh man, they're really busy. I better not go there. So that's one benefit that I find is really great. Is that you get
are very infrequent.
less interrupted by the outside world.
Nice. Yeah, so we are getting close at the end of our time box. Speaking about time, it's that consistent thing that none of us can control, and we're hitting the end of it. So
always in one direction.
Yes,
goes in one direction.
Yes,
but it's right to manage
until we get the. Oh yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I just want to focus on, mention, is that the one computer thing can be a constraint, but often it's more for mobbing. It's more work in progress of one. That's the thing. You can be using multiple computers, but you're working on one thing.
I get it.
Then the other thing too is thank you for sharing your, you know, that it may not be your cup of tea, and that's great. And that's one thing that's kind of built into what Chris was saying is that nothing is forced, right? It's you're free to enter and exit a mob. You go work solo, come back.
That's fantastic.
But we are at time. So is there anything you'd like to plug or share before we close out the episode?
Well, I got a new book on Throughput Accounting. It's the only one and first one that deals with knowledge work. I've went where no one has gone before, so to speak, because I drew some line in the sense and I extended the perimeter. And the title is Seeing Money Clearly, using Throughput Accounting to manage and understand knowledge work. And you can download it soon on every bookstore.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again so much for being on the show. I learned a lot from this. It was a good stretch for me.
It was a stretch for me too, believe me.
Yeah, so to our audience, you know, what are your opinions on the relationships between Lean and theory of constraints and throughput accounting? How do these things interplay? What's your thoughts on that? How does it tie into mobbing and a collective work and really delivering value? Yeah, we love your opinions in the comments on YouTube, social media on Twitter and LinkedIn. And please share this episode with somebody who you think can contribute well to the conversation. And until next time, mob well and have a good one. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.